We will move on now to our next speaker, who is Mzahen Alsaloum. Welcome to you, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to tell us.
So I'm going to start from the point where, when you've invited me here, you've told me I want your contribution as a professional person into the human sector. So I will not talk from the perspective of the lobbying, neither like the PR, nor as like for the Jews or for anyone else. Let's talk like from a professional perspective at the angle of the threats against the European national security. Starting from the point that when I looked into those two organizations in the beginning, I have seen that like it's a very classic model where we have seen like terrorist organization that is listed inside Europe that has just established an NGO inside Europe, and this NGO, its role is only like promoting for and lobbying for like human rights, NGOs activities, attracting funds and collecting money for like humanitarian causes. But all of that is being used by the listed terrorist organizations that is behind the NGOs. And we have seen that with several organizations. We have seen Wagner have done that in Europe before. We have seen like the IRGC, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, and the Iraqi Shiite militia groups. All of those groups, they have their own NGOs inside Europe, and these NGOs, they act as a pure like human rights NGOs or human rights centers or charity centers, and no one can touch them, because what they do simply, they are weaponizing the European legal system and the bureaucracy of the European legal system against Europe and against the West itself. And we are talking about several patterns where we have seen the same as what are the NGOs of the other terror groups that Samidoun and Masar Badil are doing with us. The first one, the money. Samidoun and Masar Badil, they are involved in collecting money right here in Europe a lot and in the West. And here we are talking about hundreds of thousands of contribution where they just like weaponize like the human rights to collect money and the rights of the victims in the Middle East to collect the money from the European people and use that money to fund the enemies of Europe. Everyone these days, when we are talking about the USAID investigations that are going on, everyone is asking themselves, like those who are investigating the USAID, they are talking about cashing out the corrupted people or cashing out the terrorist organizations. You know that most of the European fund that goes to countries like Yemen, like Gaza before the war, like Syria, like a lot of conflict zones in Africa as well, they end up between the hands of the de facto terrorist organizations that are ruling and governing these countries. For example, in Yemen, the Houthis, they have established a lot of local NGOs. With these local NGOs that they have established into these countries, they were taking the European funds that leave from Europe to middle people who are the terroristic allies to Europe, and those terroristic allies to Europe, they give the money to the local NGOs that they have links to the Houthis, and they just like bring invoices from local traders to legalize the money or legalize the spending of the money. Masar Badil and Samidoun, they are doing the same. And not only that, they are using the same route that some NGOs, they have links to Hamas, and the Lebanese Hezbollah, they are using. They just send the money to local NGOs in neighboring countries, to the Palestinian territories or the Palestinian territories, and then they cash out the money right there, such as Lebanon and some other countries. The second point about like the threats against the European national security. We have the strategic spying activities that these terrorist organizations, they are doing, or they are recruiting their own people. In organizations such as like Masar Badil and Samidun and some other organizations that they have links to groups such as Houthis, the IRGC, the Syrian regime before, Shiite militia groups, and all of these, the axis of resistance groups, all of them, they have their own recruits into the highest lawmaking institutes inside Europe. I don't know if any one of you know that, but a poor country like Cuba, they made the worst and the most dangerous spying operations against the most powerful country in the world, which is against the US. In one case, we have like an ambassador. He was spying for the Cuban regime for 40 years. And the second one, an intelligence officer who is a leader into the intelligence community was spying for the Cuban regime for 20 years. And none of these two people, they were recruited for money. Both of them, their motivation was their beliefs. They were believe in the extremist left values, and Cuba just recruited them, and again, the only motivation wasn't money, the only motivation is just the belief. So what does it take for these people like Samidun or Masar Badil to recruit people like that? The second point, the smaller spying activities where we have like smaller national security threats against Europe. In an event that happened recently in Europe, we already knew that some of like Palestinian links and like axis of resistance linked groups, they have their own recruits into some municipalities. We're talking here about municipalities, something very simple, or like train companies that they operated trains. They were able to attract information out of these recruits, and they have used them to sabotage the infrastructure of that event. And it's one of the biggest global events in the world that a very big European city has hosted. And again, none of these were recruited for money. All of these were recruited for their own beliefs. The other point that I want to talk about it, in the beginning of the war, in the beginning of the Russian terrorist aggression against Ukraine, we have seen it was exposed that in one of the European municipalities, there was like an extremist left recruit was helping some criminal groups that they have links to Russia and to the IRGC to smuggle weapons throughout some ports that are related to these municipalities, and they wanted to use these weapons as sleeper cells when Russia wants to act inside Europe, or the IRGC or any of their proxies want to act against Europe. The second, the third point about the threats that we have seen, they are using the same pattern. We have seen recently a lot of actions have been taken in Germany against like the Shiite religious centers, in UK as well, but UK is not a member of the European Parliament anymore. These actions were taken based on very small intel that came from the Middle East, that these centers, all of these centers, they are being used for the IRGC and their proxies to act as freely as they want inside Europe. So they do whatever they want from inside Europe. They recruit sleeper cells inside the Middle East. They recruit people here. They help with like illegitimate PR and lobbying activities. They are active in Europe for collecting and money laundering, for collecting money and money laundering and smuggling money. I know a lot of you here are scared right now or freaked, but that's the reality that we have to see. The point right now that I want to talk about the solution. The solution, the problem is like the whole European legal system. We can't like change the system, but the only solution is that we declare those two organizations, and just like a small point that I will get back to it later on, declaring Samidoun without declaring Masar Badil will make it like pointless. But declaring those two terrorist organizations on the terror list will help a lot to avoid a lot of these activities. For example, if you legally declare these two groups, like if you don't declare these two groups on the terrorist list, these people, they can do lobbying, they can collect money, they can even recruit people into the European government, like institutes, and no one will touch them. Why? Because when they go through the vetting system, or the recruits go through the vetting system, they will not appear in the system of the terror list. So no one can take actions on that, and no one will be aware of that. Just for your information, a group like the Houthi, it's a group that's sitting in the Middle East, which is committed crimes worse than ISIL. They are just like behind the history, completely behind the history. They don't even know how to use the phones. They were able to send their own recruits to attend the most elite European events, just because they were not declared as terrorist organizations, and they took over and they took control of the NGO's file, and they were able to release visas for their own people to inside Europe, just because this group is not designated. So when they push anyone as an independent Yemeni activist, they will not appear in the system as a threat. They came here, they did whatever they want, and some of these people, they were rewarded by being like senior officials inside the Houthis themselves right now. So the only solution, the only legal solution, we have two solutions. The first one is we change the whole system, which we can't do, or we designate them as terrorist organizations. So from the operational, and from the tactical point of view, the only solution is designating them. Again, why Europe cannot take action is because of the legal system. I will give two examples. The deputy CEO of, which is like originally like a European, I'm sorry to say that, with a full name. She is the deputy CEO of Samidoun, but at the same time, she's the focal point between Samidoun and Masar Badil. And right now, I will explain why like declaring Masar Badil is important as declaring Samidoun. But the deputy CEO of Samidoun, who is also a focal point between Samidoun and Masar Badil, she was arrested before in the UK. The British authorities, they couldn't do anything, just because the European legal system, it takes you into that loop. What is first? Is it like the chicken or the egg? Should we get a warrant from the judge to investigate her? But we can't investigate her because we cannot take warrants, since we will be accused of like spying against a European citizen and all of these legal stories that we all know. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, that his name was mentioned by one of my colleagues right here, one of her colleagues, he was arrested in a country that doesn't have this distribution into their legal system, which is Israel. Within 72 hours of investigations, they have exposed that he was involved in a lot of terror actions or terror-linked actions in Europe, in the West, and in the Middle East as well. And he went to Israel as part of that arrangement. This lady that I'm talking about her, last week, she was in the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, the biggest event for all the IRGC-linked terrorist organizations. She was there, and she was there as like one of the biggest leaders. The same lady, she got a reward from the Iranian regime and from Khamenei himself, and that reward was given to two individuals. She shared that reward with two individuals. The first one was Ziad Nakhala, the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the second one is Ismail Haniyeh, the former head of Hamas that we all know. But like Khamenei will not give her like a reward just because she's telling us that Israel is an apartheid regime. She's supposed to be able to serve with her own organization and her own teams. She's supposed to be able to serve at the same level at what Hamas and PIG themselves have served. for the benefit of the Iranian regime and its own interests. Anyway, getting back to why it's important to designate Masar Badil as it has the same importance as designating Samidun. All of these groups or all of these terrorist organizations, throughout the history, they learn from their lessons. So when they started in the 90s or before like the Arab Spring or even like before the 7th of October terrorist attack, all of them, they were committing mistakes. And these mistakes that they were committing, they have helped later on to countering them. I will give an example. There is an organization in the US, which we worked with the law firm that was working on that case. It's called AGP, which is like this, like the American copy of like Samidun and Masar Badil. The head of it, or one of its founders, he found out that he funded the group that conducted a terrorist attack in 1986 in Israel against like American Israeli citizens, and one of them was like a child, like just a kid, but they killed them because they are terrorists. They learned from their own, like they just disposed the organization, and they established a new organization that is known as AGP. And this new organization, it has links to organizations that are sitting in the Middle East, and they do all the dirty work throughout Middle Eastern local NGOs, and all the clean work goes through like the Western NGOs. So right now, Samidun has committed a lot of mistakes, which like now makes it dirty and makes it easier to be designated as terrorist organization than what they have done, the same as what they are doing always. They just established a new organization called Masar Badil with a new board. None of the previous people are involved on papers, but we all know that they all collaborate and work together. And these people, just like if it was easy from a legal perspective to declare Samidun, it will not be easier to declare or to designate Masar Badil, since it did not committed on papers any bad activities, or like they just like learned from their lesson of Samidun. Right now, I will get back to where I started from, like to the ethical part. Like I'm done with the technical part, let's say, or like the professional part. But I want to mention 3 points. The first point is that we have seen in Amsterdam what's like these terrorists have called Ghazwat Amsterdam, where they have mass attacked or used one small argument to mass attack the Jewish communities and Jewish people. I have friends in the Balkan who helped Palestinians, but they were attacked with extremist lefties by graffitis and by the dirtiest things you have ever seen. They are under threats. I have friends all over Europe. Just because they are Jews, they are under threats. I don't know if ethically that's acceptable in 2025. I'm a child of like a Muslim religious woman who wear hijab, but my mom taught me what I don't accept on myself, I would never accept on anyone else. So I don't accept that anyone will come and commit any racist or any bad actions against her just because she's religious and she's wearing hijab. And this is the same value that will apply on the Jews or anyone else if they became a victim of their own identity, whatever is that identity. The second ethical point that I want to understand from everyone right here, or even those who are not here. Like, these people are promoting and publicly promoting groups like the Syrian regime, Lebanese Hezbollah, IRGC, and Houthis. What are the difference between what have these parties committed against the civilians in the Middle East and even against Western citizens? What's the difference between these crimes and the crimes that ISIL have committed? And I'm a victim of these groups. My brother was killed by a jihadi group, but the rest of the members of my family and the whole of my family was destroyed by the Iranian and the Syrian regime alliance, backed by Russia. What's the difference? Ethically, just tell me what's like being beheaded by a knife that is carried by a Shiite Islamist. It's the same as being beheaded by a knife carried by like a Sunni Islamist, or even lefty, or whatever is the ideology. The crime is a crime. So what's making you very comfortable about and accepting that these parties are like, we are tolerant with promoting the crimes of these parties, and we are not tolerant with ISIL? What's the difference? The third ethical point that I want to conclude with, the worst thing we have seen in two wars we have seen recently. In the Syrian war, we have seen that, and it has been proven that for this access of resistance, they did not mass kill their own people, not because they don't want, because they just can't. And when they saw under Obama's administrations, for once, that they can do that, they mass killed the Syrian people. They mass killed the Iranian people. They mass killed the Iraqi people. They mass killed the Yemeni people. And they mass killed the Palestinians themselves who just dared to say no to them. The second thing we have seen in the recent wars in the Middle East, that these terrorist organizations, they did not mass kill the Jews, and they did not repeat what Hitler has done, not because they can, not because they don't want, or because they are ethical, or their ethics will prevent them. It's just like because they can't. Because when they could for 3 hours, they have proven for all of us that they would do that. In 3 hours, they have done things that we would not, who would imagine that like a teenage being beheaded after being killed and shooted, and they just carry like her phone and they film her on her live Facebook and they tag her mom and they just behead her and they just killed her. And this article with its video is on the CNN. So again, they did not do what they have done, what Hitler has done to the Jews, just because they can't. And the duty of all of us right here is making sure that they can't everywhere. They can't mass kill us, all of us who will be there to say no to them, just because we can deter them and we can ban them. The IRGC, they have used the hitmen of some criminal mafias in Europe to kill 3 Iranian opposition figures in the West. One of them was in the middle of Amsterdam. And the other 2 nearby the ICC building inside The Hague. What would guarantee that all of that would happen? The only thing that guarantee is designating such groups on the terrorist list, and thank you.
Brilliant.